Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this Google EDU on Air. Welcome back for those of you who've been with us for past events in this series. And thank you for joining us for the first time if this is your first event. My name is Jennie Magiera, and I am the Global Head of Education Impact here at Google for Education. I'm thrilled to continue being your host for this series, and today is a special day because we're joined by 3 experts in the EDU space to talk to you about adult learning, how we can do virtual teacher support and professional development. And so I'm very grateful to be joined today by 3 educators from Leading Educators. Nick Keynes, who is the Instructional Leadership Coach. Hi, Nick. Chung-Hao Fu, who is the Chief Executive Officer, coming to us today from Houston. Hi, Chung-Hao. Thank you for joining us. And Laura Miley, who's the Managing Director of Program Strategy over there at Leading Educators. So thank you, Nick, Chung-Hao, and Laura, for being with us. Now, before we dive into this important conversation about helping all of the adult learners and staff in your organization be the best version of yourself, we want to make sure we're being mindful of the state of the world and important things that are really happening in our communities. And so we're going to take a moment to pause, reflect, and honor everything that's happening in the world. And Chung-Hao is going to lead us through this. So Chung-Hao, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Jennie, for having us. And we know at Google, as well as at Leading Educators, disrupting racial inequity is one of our core values. And at this particular moment, we really wanted to take time in fellowship with all of you on the call to recognize the police brutality against Black lives and the systemic racism that is affecting so many community of colors in our country. And so we just want to invite you for a moment of silence and fellowship, and we hope that you will join us in observance now. Thank you, everyone. We're so honored to be here and to have this space with all of you. Jennie, if you might move us to the next slide. It's my pleasure to tell you a little bit about Leading Educators and our work. We are a partner to school systems across the country. And what we do is to really ensure that adult learning matters and results in improved learning and outcomes for students. And as you can see on the slide, we do this by really focusing on 4 things, specifically around equity, and anti-racism work, around deepening content knowledge and pedagogy in English and mathematics, thinking about the learning conditions that support adults, whether that's time to collaborate or really having high quality resources, and also the leadership that results in adults feeling vulnerable and psychologically safe to do this work together. And really crucial to our work is the suite of Google tools that we use to share everything that we've created. We believe that they're essential for collaborating and deprivatizing practice. And so we're so excited to share our practices with you, to engage in this dialogue, to learn a few, and to be a part of this global conversation. And so in the next slide, we'd love to know who you are, your name, your location, your role, and perhaps, if you're game, one feeling that you're feeling. And we'll just take a moment to get to know you all before we dive into the learning.
So thank you, everyone, for jumping in the chat. I can see some people are already in there. Thank you, Jose and Denise. Thank you so much for your greetings. If you're not sure where to chat, you can either see it to the side or right below this video on your screen right there. And feel free to hop in and share those prompts. So what's your name? Where are you logging in from? What's your role? And how are you feeling today?
Great. Well, we are excited to continue to get to know you and hope that you'll have a rich chat dialogue too throughout the session. And to frame our learning together, I'm delighted to pass it over to Laura.
Awesome. Thanks, Chung-Hao. So thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your days to be here with us. Like Chung-Hao said, we're so excited to think about some tools that we can offer you all today as you think about building really strong teacher support and PD that leads to equity in the classroom. So to do that, we have 3 goals for this hour. We hope, Jenny, if you go to the next slide, that at the end of this hour, you're going to walk away with 3 new things, 2 pieces of knowledge, and then a bonus objective. So our first hope for this time is that at the end of it, you will know 4 principles for designing inclusive virtual learning for adults. So that's really going to help you think in theory about the way that you design. And then for the latter half of the session, we're going to focus on putting that knowledge into practice. So you're going to walk away with 4 practices that you can try out in your context to really support design and facilitation for teachers and students learning. And then our last outcome is a bonus, because you can't really accomplish it in this hour, but we hope that you'll feel excited and ready to try out one of the pieces of knowledge in practice in your context. So to really make sure that you're taking the information you're learning and feeding it forward in ways that support teachers and students. To do so, we want to offer you a resource. If you'll take a second, and I think this will end up in the chat as well, we're going to ask for you to open a new tab on your computer and to visit this tiny URL. And what you'll see once you type this in is a button that says make a copy. And what's going to happen is you'll get a resource handout for our session today that is your personal copy of that link. So you might need to log into your Gmail to get it. And once you have that document, this is a private copy of the handout for you that will live in your Google Drive, so you can go back to it after the session. And so I'm going to go ahead and give you all a minute or 2 here to click on that tiny URL, pull up the handout, and we'll make sure to pay attention to the comments to see if there's anything to troubleshoot.
And I just dropped that in the chat, where I see so many folks from all over the world joining in. Thank you so much, Betsy from New Orleans, and we've got Angela from Texas. We have another Tulsa local there, Nick, who's shouting out. Even in the green room, I was joking with Nick, like, maybe we'll find someone else from Tulsa. And look, Tulsa, like, I spoke a truth to power. It really happened. And so then a few other folks, we have some folks from Peru joining there. As you're clicking on that, just, so excited to see folks from all over the world joining us from Alberta, Canada. And so as you go to that same chat where you said hello and shared where you're from and how you're feeling, you can see that I also dropped that tiny URL that you see on the screen, should you want to avoid typos or having to get it exactly right in your search box there. So go ahead and just click it, make a copy, and we're going to make this interactive. I'm so excited to dig in with you guys.
So I'm going to say one last note here. We just want to get really clear with you all about some of the design choices we're making, even in this hour of training together. And so what we're hoping is that this handout is a place for you to do some personal reflection, to ask some questions. You'll see the very last row, the white box, is a place for you to put some questions for the Q&A that we're going to do at the end. So you have a space to capture your own thinking that you can carry forward after this hour is over. We're also going to ask you to use the chat sometimes, and that's going to be an opportunity for you all to share your thinking for the greater good of our community here, to make sure that we get the chance to learn from each other, and that we, as facilitators, get the chance to learn about your learning and get some real-time feedback so we can make sure that we're supporting you and meeting your needs. So thank you for taking the time to pull up that handout, and I'm going to hand it to Nick for our first burst of engagement here.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. Nick Keynes here, and I get the pleasure of inviting you to our first of 3 active engagement bursts. So, as we all know, when the global pandemic started, all of our teaching and learning experiences moved to the land of virtual opportunities like this one. So we know that many of you have engaged in some really powerful virtual learning before this call, and we want to give you an opportunity to reflect on those in our greater community. So first, think about a virtual professional development experience that you've had. What did it feel like? What did it sound like? What did it even look like? I remember one I went to on virtual coaching that made me feel moved because we read a poem together. So what about you? Take 30 seconds and think to yourself and write your thoughts in your handout, because this reflection time is just for you. We'll do this before we share out whole group. So go ahead and write, what did it look like, sound like, and feel like in a virtual professional development?
Nick, as you're giving them wait time, I see some questions popping up about how Laura, you created that doc to do the forced copy. So something really interesting for those of you who are wondering that as you're reflecting, Laura and her team created a Google Doc so that you can have an interactive piece to today's virtual learning experience. And she just deleted the last 4 letters in any Google Doc URL. It ends with EDIT or edits for you. If you change the word edit to the word copy and share that link with someone, as long as you have the sharing settings on so anyone with the link can view, when they get that link, it forces them to make a copy just like you did. So it's like a virtual photocopy machine, or for those of us who are a little bit older, a virtual mimeograph. So it's a really great trick to help a bunch of learners in a space that you don't have them in a Google Classroom. You might not have their email address to get access to a document and create their own version of it. And Laura shared that there are directions for that linked right at the bottom of the handout too. So if you just scroll on down to the bottom of the handout, you can learn how to do that. So thank you for asking the question. And I think that that's just a really great meta moment to kind of talk about the how. So thank you, Laura, for making that possible. And thanks for the question, audience.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, and right on time. Now we have the opportunity. I would love for people to share in the chat, what was that experience? What is that experience, what virtual learning experience that you experienced that you want to reflect on? What did it look like? What did it sound like? What did it feel like? And Jenny, I'd love to hear what people are saying.
Absolutely. So Kaylee already shared that one of the best online professional learning experiences that she had was receiving concrete and valuable tools with an online platform that can directly be applied after leaving a session. And I have to say, like, I feel you, Kaylee. For me, like, if I walk out of a professional learning experience being like, I can go back to my classroom and use that right now, that feels really valid. So thanks for sharing that. There are a few other folks who are still typing. Rochelle, just right off the top, says, Laura, she wants to give you a quick thank you for adding the directions to the doc. It's really helpful to be able to scroll down and have those, so if she doesn't remember it later, she can get access. Peter said that he loves it when there's easy access and collaboration. He likes live meetings like this because he likes to be able to see and hear the facilitators, and he actually likes it when the participants can see each other too, to kind of build that community. And I would agree, Peter, really great point. Rebecca Hernandez says it looks organized. The sound, she said it sounded humdrum, which I like that word, humdrum. And the feel can be disconnected though. So the virtual learning, sometimes it doesn't feel super connected. Leslie sharing that it gets right to the point and offers tips and tricks for using tech in the classroom. So like actual tips and tricks.
Thanks so much for that. I heard themes there of concrete tools, relevance, organization, and feeling connected, or like I want to feel connected. And you can notice when you don't feel connected from the virtual space. Thank you for highlighting those. What I want to do as we shift over a little bit is that for our second task here, I want us to keep in mind a past or a future lesson or a session that you want to focus on today, so you can make the learning from this session stick to a relevant experience as we start talking about virtual professional development. Also, I just want to highlight, many educators, students, families were moved into virtual learning as an emergency response to a global pandemic. I hope this conversation and conversations like these highlight that the learning is not just for emergencies, and that virtual learning doesn't have to only just be for emergencies. This could be the start of an ongoing reimagining of what learning can look like. And that can be kind of exciting too. So as we continue, we hope that you keep in mind that effective live learning strategies are also effective in virtual formats too. So building on those strengths is a really good place to start. An example is, we can't see your face right now, but we can use chat in order to pull you into the room and pull your voices into the room. So that gives us a way of being able to see you and relate to you, which I think is really awesome. So with that, I want to pass it to my friend, Laura.
All right, thanks, Nick. So we are about to zero in and build from that reflection you just did on your own experience with effective virtual learning to offer a tool that we have created at Leading Educators to guide some of the work we do around teacher development and learning. So what you're about to see is a number of principles that we call our adult learning principles. These are grounded in a few buckets of information. First is a synthesis of lots of the best research from cognitive scientists and affective scientists and learning scientists, and then also from the best practices that we've learned over the 9 years that we've been supporting teachers and systems around the country with professional learning. So there are 4 principles here. You'll see them at the next row of your handout if you're somebody who likes to see them up close, and there's space there for you to take notes on them. And just a quick note on the purpose of these principles. We really developed these to get really concrete together about what success looks like for us when it comes to virtual learning. So I remember being a teacher leading my first PD many, many years ago and not knowing what to put into it to make it work well for the learners and for the teachers I was supporting. And so these principles are meant to be a tool to help you self-reflect as you design professional learning, as you design meetings, and as you collaborate with colleagues around teacher support. So let's go ahead and check out the first principle, which is that the content is grounded in the context of your learners and in students' needs. So I don't know about you all, but if you've ever taught the same lesson more than once or led a professional development to different groups of teachers, you've probably learned that the content of learning needs to look different, and one-size-fits-all learning doesn't usually effectively meet every person's needs. And so when we think about designing learning virtually or live, we always want to start with the context of the learners that we're supporting. So we share a lot of gratitude to Stanford's Design School and to the National Equity Project here, because we've been really influenced by their work on human-centered and liberatory design. And they have an amazing suite of resources that can help you think about how you are understanding, listening to, and empathizing with the people that you're supporting as you start to design. So that is our first principle. The second, now that we've gotten grounded in the needs of the people in front of us, we want to think about where are we going. So at the end of this session, at the end of this hour, what will success look like for all of us? And to do that, we really pull from 3 lenses. I'm going to give you a second to see if you can remember those lenses from when we went through our outcomes today. There are 3 different ones. So you might have been able to pull back that those 3 lenses are what people will be able to know, how they will feel, and what they will do at the end of the session. So we want to make sure that those outcomes are really clear about not just knowledge and feeling shifting, but changing practice. So making something different for teachers or students the very next day or in the future, which is something that came up in lots of your chat responses. And then the last note I'll say here is that when it comes to these outcomes, we want to make sure that we're checking in on those outcomes. So during the session and at the end of the session with adult learners, just like with students, we want to make sure that not only do we have goals, but are we really learning, we're taking the time to learn about our learners and what they need next. So you will see us model a couple examples of how you could do that throughout the session and at the end. I'm going to go ahead and hand it to Shrimkhao for our next 2 principles.
Thanks, Laura. So our third principle is that experiences invite learners to take ownership. And we know with adult learners, just like with students, transferring the learning into practice is key. And to ensure that happens, it's really all about ownership. And so we design using an experiential learning model, first developed by David Kolb. That's K-O-L-B. He's an experiential learning expert. And so when we think about our sessions, we start with a concrete experience. It could be a case study, it could be a vignette, it could be a video, it could be some sort of simulation. But from that experience, we then invite learners to reflect on what they experienced, share learning around the theories that undergird that experience, and then really put it into practice so that people can apply it and start to transfer it. And with that in mind, we think that there's a lot more ownership. And one rule of thumb that we think about is that the facilitators generally in our sessions talk for less than 30% of the time, or for no more than 10 minutes at a stretch, to really make sure that we are inviting learners to take ownership. And then the fourth principle is that identities and strengths are included and affirmed. And just as for our students, students come into the classrooms with racial identities, with gender, with all sorts of cultural histories that are incredible assets for learning. The same is true from adults. And so we really think about how in the session framing and experiences that identities and strengths can really be affirmed and recognized and built in to a part of the learning. And so with those 4 principles in mind, content is grounded in context, outcomes spark changes in practice, experiences invite ownership, and identity and strengths are affirmed, we'd love to give you a chance to kind of apply and compare. And so if you go to the next slide for us, Jenny. We have our second active burst. And so we want to invite you to actually go back to the handout that you've been recording your notes in, and just write in the next box a connection that you're making between your original reflection around effective virtual learning and the adult learning principles. And so just maybe for yourself now, we'll give you some think time. How do those 4 learning principles connect to the original experience that you wrote about?
And for those of you who are just now joining us and catching up, I am going to drop the link to the virtual handout back in the chat. So just scroll down to the chat if you're not seeing it on your screen, and I will drop that link to the virtual handout right there so you can drop in. Again, for those of you who haven't been with us since the beginning, this is a Google Doc that Laura set up so that it automatically makes a copy when you click on it, so you get your own version of it. What you type, only you can see, so that's private to you. And the directions for how to do this on your own, should you want to use this as a strategy in your own professional learning environments, is at the bottom of this very same doc. So super easy peasy for you to replicate.
Great. And so once you've had a chance to reflect in your own document, as Jenny said, we would invite you to then chat it out to the group so that the group can learn from each other as well. But write first in your own document so that you have that for posterity, and then chat to the group so we can benefit from your learning. Jenny, if you wouldn't mind being our radio announcer here, if you see any comments that you want to lift up for conversation, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think right now I see that a lot of folks are reflecting and typing it in. So if we just want to give folks just a few more minutes to drop it in. For those of you who are ready, as Chung Hao said, go ahead and copy and paste whatever you put in there and drop it into the big chat so that we could have a community discussion about it. And for those of you who didn't realize, you can thumbs up each other. So if someone says something and you're like, you stole the words right out of your mouth, or like, oh, I feel that, like you could go ahead and give them a little thumbs up and validate that. And you can also reply directly to people. All right, so it looks like they're coming in, Shamkau. So Stephanie relates to content provided in professional learning that it needs to be grounded in context and what students' needs are most. So she really felt that was relevant to her. And she felt this is key, especially with virtual learning and the current issues that we're facing. Students' needs and support systems are different, and finding a balance to help educators connect with those are key. Celeste Garza says that the lesson cycle of experience, reflection, shared learning, and practice allows everyone to participate, so it makes it a much more inclusive environment. And Patty, what resonated with her was the talking for less than 30% of the time. Make it relevant for your audience, and don't and share the air, right? Don't take it all up. Peter also agreed talking less and listening more is key, and allows participants to take more ownership and learn more effectively. Let's see here. Maria says that time to practice and experience the tasks allows them to take that ownership. So I'm hearing a lot of themes around ownership. And I'm going to try really hard to pronounce your name correctly. And so I want to respect your pronunciation. So I apologize if I don't get this right phonetically, but I believe it's Kyriaki. Celios says that more hands-on and activities engage the audience.
lot of rich learning. This is really exciting.
See here, Kaylee just dropped in and said that she loves how participants, she likes the idea of giving participants time to play with the material. And she thinks it's great because then it allows the facilitator to help troubleshoot real-time questions. So not saving the hands-on part for at home when if there's any cognitive dissonance, it's like, oh, but I don't have someone here to help answer my question, like doing it in real time so I can experience the feeling forward and the iteration and I have that support.
Yeah. You know, Jenny, like as I hear this, like I think one of the things we just really want to stamp is that these principles for adult learning are really the same kinds of principles that we would do for in-person learning, right? We know that learners need opportunities to sense make, to really own the learning, to actively engage. And so these principles do cross-apply. And so I think in the next part of the session, we're going to talk about some of the practices we use because the how is different, right, when we get into virtual learning. And so we'll move from principles to practice shortly too.
Dana just dropped in and said that she relates to the importance and big impact that conversation throughout lessons and learning has on overall learning. So engaging in conversation and discourse, and the need for reflection and processing time. So I see, you know, Laura, Nick, Chung Hao, you're all practicing that teacher hat skill of wait time, which for me as an educator was always a struggle. As you know, like I was like, oh, I want to move on, but it's so important to give that wait time and allow for reflection. And Dana's really feeling that, and she wants her kids to drive their own learning and have reflection in their own learning. And it's a key, it's a key component for her around that. And Kelly was saying that, like, you know, the learning has to be meaningful to the learner, so it has to feel like it's important to them. And Maria also names that as well, that it needs to be relevant content, but also facilitated effectively. And knowing that all students and learners need a different type of support, but close human contact, even virtual, is a key way to keep them engaged and motivated.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, everybody, for taking the time to reflect there, and for those of you who are willing to share your thinking with the group. It's so powerful to get to learn from you all. And honestly, thinking about this session, it's weird not to see your faces. So it's really important and helpful for us to get to hear where you're at. And so thank you for sharing your thinking there. I see a quick question from Jean Potter. And so thank you for sharing that question, Jean. Her question is, as a presenter, how do you encourage reluctant attendees to participate, either in the chat or when possible, respond verbally to questions? So just wanted to see, Chung Hao, if you wanted to respond to that.
Well, Jean, I think it's such a great question, first of all. And I think one thing we think about is how to make it more psychologically safe to respond and lower the affective risk. So you might think about some of your first chats being really low risk. So people's names, yes, no questions, multiple choice questions before you get to like richer questions. And so I've heard it before that like you start with polling and then chatting and then really discourse if you're trying to elevate the level of risk in virtual learning so that people can feel safe to enter where they feel comfortable. But I would love to hear what others are thinking too. Laura, Nick, what's worked for you?
What usually works for me pretty well is to start sharing myself a little bit. Just to, if I'm going to ask you to be vulnerable, I probably need to put myself out there so you can see I'm with you too. I'm not just a person standing up here. And that usually invites people, especially people who identify with me in some way on any kind of identifiable markers, to feel more open to wanting to share, especially verbally.
Yeah, thanks, Chung Hao. Thanks, Nick. I think the one other layer I would add there is just, we're intentionally asking you all to write in your handout first, because that's your private, safe space. And so just like with students, I remember a lot of time, turn and talk was one of the strategies I used the most because it gave kids the chance to have a smaller group and to really flesh out their thinking before more publicly sharing it. And so while in this situation, we don't have the chance for you to turn to a person next to you, you can turn to yourself in your handout and do some conversation with yourself before bringing it out to the group. So with that, I would love to pivot us to focus on our second objective. I heard many of you talking about wanting the learning to be practical. And so we share that objective here. And so we want to spend the latter part of the session focused on what you can do differently today or tomorrow to put these principles into action in your practice. So we are going to show you 4 principles here or 4 practices, that will support you in moving those principles from theory to practice. And so on the next slide, I'm going to give you a chance to read these principles yourself, and we're going to walk through each of them one by one and share some really concrete strategies. And so I want to give you the chance to internalize what's there and to figure out where you want to pay super close attention given your needs and your context.
And Laura, for those who are visually impaired, would you mind reading them aloud?
Of course, yeah. So our first practice that we're going to spotlight is to collaborate on design using Google Docs and slides. The second is giving yourself the chance to step into the shoes of your learners so that you're testing your tasks for inclusion and relevance. The third is to really focus on engagement, and you want to focus on that engagement of learners before, during, and after your learning sessions. And finally, the fourth practice is to rehearse facilitation virtually. So I'm going to hand it to Chung Hao, who will take us into the first practice.
I think it might be passing it to Nick. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'll catch it. Oh, I got the ball. I'm so excited. Yeah, let's go ahead and move forward, Jenny. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to collaborate on design using Google Docs and slides. For me, collaboration is meaningful to me because it fights my tendency to be a perfectionist. And also it ultimately hinders my growth if I'm not collaborating. My work right now as an instructional coach is centered on coaching teacher leaders in their building in growing their own content knowledge. I also support them in leading teams at their school. I put everything that I use in Google Docs and slides as my home base for all that design, and it streamlines my level of collaboration. Too often, I've always felt like PD and development is really private, and the materials that live in Google Docs break down silos so that I can gain way more information and share with way more teachers. So I create all of my professional development in Google Slides, and I invite my colleagues around the nation to look over my work and offer feedback that's just going to make my learning better for my teachers. I also use Google Docs to sometimes ask for directed feedback, like exactly what should this slide look like, or can you please let me know if this flows really well so my colleagues know where to put their focus. This works for lesson plans, and this also works for professional development sessions. This week, actually, this entire week, I've been using virtual trainings to train local teachers in Tulsa using Google Slides that help them internalize their curriculum. They will then take the same slides I used, and they're making copies, and they're going to lead their teams at their school sites who are going to directly impact the learning that each student in Tulsa Public Schools experiences. This means that collaboration can start with me by myself, making a Google Doc and making a Google slide, but then it can move all the way through to outcomes for students. And for me, that's powerful. Let's move to the next slide. The next piece is stepping into the learner's shoes to test tasks for inclusion and relevance. Stepping into learner's shoes gives me the opportunity to build empathy and perspective. As a second grade math teacher, I was fairly confident I could solve any triple-digit subtraction problem, but if I did not work through the task with the lens for my students, meaning their strengths, their needs, their identities, what they worked on the day before, then I had no idea how to truly set them up to access that curriculum, and I missed the point of teaching. This is why it's paramount to do any task we want learners to complete, because it makes us able to have inclusion and relevance for all of those learners. On a really basic level, this could be just thinking through anything your learners are being asked to do. Complete the exit ticket students that have to complete and classwork students have to engage in. Especially useful in virtual situations because of how new the format could be for a lot of students. Also, for adult learners, completing any think, pair, share that I want adults to focus on and complete, I should do myself. This lets people know what's the depth of reflection you're looking for, and also, am I thinking about the right content? So giving that model really helps. I also want to make a note for a complex issue that I face sometimes being in Tulsa, Oklahoma, around facilitating equity sessions. We spoke about disrupting racial equity as being a big core value. So I co-facilitate in Tulsa, Oklahoma, equity sessions. I am a Black man in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and my audience is usually mostly white. I remember asking a group of mostly white women to share about their first experience when they were aware of their race. And I pushed myself to share with them my first experience, knowing that I was Black. That was scary. That still is scary. I share this because I still believe that doing the work that I want learners to do is vitally important, but I do not want to downplay the emotional labor of being a person of color, sharing across lines of difference. Not being able to catch eyes with another Black male to share that experience is sometimes very lonely. So my advice for people of color leading the equity work across lines of difference is to also give yourself space to be able to hold that for yourself too in your learning. Because if it's anything like me, sometimes it can feel isolating in group experiences. Back to you, Chung-Hao.
Thanks, Nick. So I get to talk about engaging learners before, during, and after sessions, and I'll pick up on your thread on equity sessions. And so one of the things that we found for equity learning in particular is it's so helpful to front load the readings, the videos, and shared language as pre-reading before a virtual session, because what it actually affords is everyone starting a session with the same vocabulary, the same knowledge base, the same stories, and kind of evens the playing field and also kind of sets the table a bit more for adult learning. And we also at the same time ask participants often to take the time to do like deep self-reflection so that you as a facilitator really know where are people entering the conversation. Is this their 30th equity session or is this their first time discussing privilege? And obviously how you respond is quite different. The same hold true when you're talking about text complexity in English language arts or math discourse. Having like deep reflections from facilitators and work prompts before really allows us to meet people where they're at. In terms of during the session, on the next slide, we use Google Docs a lot to capture thinking live. And here we are really leveraging the best practices of cooperative learning. So thinking about how we can create authentic groups, break larger groups apart into smaller groups with specific roles, and then really create authentic places for adults to share back their thinking to a larger group. It's like a jigsaw, but we can use breakout groups, we can use Google Docs, and we can use any kinds of formats to really create spaces for adults to work in collaboration and then share out their small group thinking in authentic large group conversations. And then finally, after the session, we've really found as an organization that it's so helpful to use tools like Google Forms or shared documents to really assess folks' thinking, not obviously in any evaluative way, but really help us to get better in our learning and also so that we can follow up with folks. And in terms of really having live artifacts, we look at annotated lesson plans, we look at annotated student work, we look at post reflections, we look at authentic lesson assessments, and all of that really allows us to know, is the adult learning really going to transfer into practices that will lead to improved student learning, which at the end of the day is the point of all the adult learning that we're doing. And with that, I will pass it back to Nick.
Awesome. When I see the word rehearse, I must admit that my theater major heart skips a little beat because I'm so excited to rehearse anything. But I know that's not how everybody feels, and I get it. So rehearsing actually allows us all to take our best intentions for what we want to execute, but practice them in a low stakes environment. So 4 quick points about rehearsing that I feel like we can carry into professional developments or also lesson plans. You can dry run or rehearse any of your sessions, any of your lessons. And we've done multiple dry runs of this very session. And I must say that getting some feedback about parts that I was nervous about made me feel more at ease, especially jokes that I felt like just weren't funny after I practiced them. Whatever. You can also give the people you're rehearsing with a role so you get different points of view. So consider someone watching you rehearse being a participant that is already an expert on that particular subject. Or being a student who sometimes runs into some challenges in virtual settings, and they can be that person for you in a very compassionate way, and you can feel more prepared. Also, while we're on the topic, dry runs can also help you work through the process of virtual engagement so you can troubleshoot before game day. So you want to make sure the sound works. What about the video clip that you want to show? All good tips for in-person facilitating and live facilitating in a virtual world too. Finally, recording yourself can be such a powerful way to get feedback for yourself all by yourself. Maybe just to know exactly how many times you did this hand movement to emphasize your points if you're anything like me, Exactly. It's super helpful. Back to you, Laura.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Chung Hao, for walking us through those 4 practices. We are coming toward the tail end of our session, and in just a minute, we're going to open it up to dig into even more of your questions. However, we wanted to spend a couple minutes just making sure that you leave with as many resources as possible to support your practice moving forward. So I wanted to call out a couple resources that you have access to at the bottom of your handout. So Jenny already mentioned one. There's a link to directions for how to create your own copy links. And then we've also linked 3 additional tools from leading educators. So one bonus tool there is a fuller version of the 4 adult learning principles that we shared earlier. You'll see that there are some indicators that you can use for self-reflection or for collaboration as you're thinking about design. The second tool on the next slide ties directly to what Nick just shared. So one of the things that we realized is as we're rehearsing and we're practicing facilitating virtual professional learning and live professional learning, it was really helpful. We needed a language, a shared language to talk about effective facilitation. And so what we did is synthesize the research on effective adult facilitation into a rubric tool that is called the Facilitation Vision of Excellence rubric, or we call it the FEVER. And so that is a tool that you can take to use for self-reflection or to give facilitation feedback to colleagues or to ask for participants to give you feedback. And so that is also linked at the bottom of your handout. And the last thing is a link to a blog post that we recently shared from one of our amazing teammates, Sandra Jin, about adapting those the design principles for virtual learning. And so that is an opportunity for you to see a little bit more in depth how we're thinking about virtual learning for adults. And also, if you scroll to the very bottom of that blog post, you'll have the chance to sign up to join our email list where you can stay in touch with us moving forward and get additional resources and opportunities and find connection points. We would love for this to be the start of collaboration, not the end. And so we encourage you to sign up there. And so with that, I'm going to bring us back to a familiar slide. We made a promise to you at the top of the hour that you would walk away hopefully knowing and feeling and doing some things differently. And so not only do we want to center on those objectives, we want to make sure that we're assessing them and that we're really walking the walk of our principles. And so in a minute, we're going to ask you to click on one more link. You'll see it linked at the bottom of your handout, and it's also going to go into the chat. And what you'll see on the next slide is the link to a very short Google form. And that Google form is going to serve as a check for understanding for this session. So it's going to give you the chance to reflect on the objectives that we had together and to kind of rate yourself on how confident you feel with these objectives, and also to share any practices that you are going to be feeding forward. So Jenny, if you could go to the next slide, what you'll see there is the link. And we're going to ask to take 3 minutes to do this check for understanding before the Q&A. And just a quick note there, one of the things that we've learned is often if the check for understanding is the very last thing in the session and timing gets tricky, it can sometimes not happen. And so we really want to make sure that we carve the time to learn about your learning right now in the present so that we can make sure that we are understanding what you're taking away and we're feeding that forward into the work that we'll continue to do with learners. So with that, I'm going to ask Jenny to start our timer. We're going to take 3 minutes of silent time to reflect on the check for understanding. If you finish early, you have 2 options. You can chat your action step into the chat if you want to share that for the good of the community. And you can also start to share your Q&A, your questions for the Q&A. So we will come back together in 3 minutes.
Thank you so much for that, Laura. I just dropped, again, for those of you who don't have quick access or aren't able to type it in, I did drop in the URL for the checking for understanding form right into the chat, so you can grab it there. And just that we don't have dead air for anyone who jumps in and is wondering, oh, is this frozen or what's going on? I'm going to just drop some instrumental music for this 3 minutes so everyone knows that we are still live. And for those of you who are wondering what this is one of my favorite instrumental tricks. It's a band called Vitamin String Quartet, and it's their string quartet that takes popular music and puts them into classical, no lyric composition. So we'll continue here for another few moments and just have this music in the background as you complete it. And I like how we got right to the swell of the song as the timer went off, Laura. That was intentional. We totally rehearsed. No, we didn't. That was just perfect timing. Should I go to the next slide, Laura, or stay here?
Sure, that sounds great. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to fill that out. And we're really eager. I'm resisting the urge to go through and read all of your responses right now, and instead would love to take this time to open it up for some Q&A.
Well, as I know, there's a lot of questions coming out. People are so grateful, Laura, Nick, and Chung Hao, for all of your expertise that you've shared with them so generously today. I want to say thank you as well. It feels a little bit like we just had like a PD party. I mean, there were even like goodie bags at the end where you were giving out like bonus prizes. And I mean, what educator doesn't want like a good rubric? So thank you so much for all of that. There's a lot of questions that are coming in. I'll start with like an easy one that I can answer myself. Dawn was asking, can you share that music group in the chat, please? Yes, it is Vitamin String Quartet. Vitamin, like eat your vitamin, strings, like string music, and quartet, because there's 4 of them. I'm putting that in the chat right now. They're amazing. Definitely check them out. I use them all the time as a math teacher for my students because it wasn't distracting for them, but it kind of sets the mood. However, we have a lot of other questions that I know that the 3 of you would be great to really dig into. So a couple of them, let's just start with Catherine. Catherine was asking earlier about norms for chat, speaking of the chat. So, you know, as you're facilitating professional learning and you're having the chat coming in real time, how do you focus while you're presenting? It's hard to pause and post. What are your rules of thumbs for like having your video on? So I think she's trying to get at, you want to be personable, you want to create the relationship, but you have a hard time multitasking. So how do you guys manage that?
I can take this one. We're doing a little bit of backstage figuring out who's going to do what. So thank you for that question, Dawn. I would share a couple things here. So as an org, for the most part, within our culture, we do use video a lot of the time. And in part, that's because it gives us the chance to see and respond to people's body language and really feel like we're in the space together. And we also recognize sometimes people might not want to be on video. And so we kind of toggle back and forth, but I would say most of the time we default in our culture as a remote org to being on video so that we get the chance to see and connect with the other humans. And then to your point about monitoring the chat, man, I really feel you on that one. And so one of a concrete practice that we generally have in place is no matter if it's a meeting or a session, we always have at least one designated person who is not doing the live facilitation in the moment, who's monitoring the chat. So we try and have an explicit role so that there is somebody monitoring the chat and kind of responding to tech or logistics issues. Today, her name is Jessica. Thank you, Jessica, for being here and doing that for us here behind the scenes. And so that's one of the concrete practices we use there.
Awesome, thank you. There's another question here from Joanna, and she has a question here. I'm going to do my best to try and make meaning of it and paraphrase. So she said, actually, what are my breadcrumbs to get people pumped about back to school PD? I think she's trying to say, like, how does she start, like, kind of laying the foundation to get people to like build that anticipation and excitement of like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to come back from my restful summer, which was hopefully restful, and be excited to go to staff PD, which in some really great organizations, that is the case. Like I remember for me, I could not wait to go back to school and see my coworkers, my students, my principal, because she laid those breadcrumbs out for me to get me excited. But for those who might not have staff who are as excited to get back into the virtual or physical PD space, do you guys have ideas to get them excited and to make it fun?
I have some that are popping up, but I want to just say, like, the first thing that comes to mind is so much of this is contextual, and that folks know their people and what they need. This has been such a hard stretch for all of us in terms of the pandemic and what's happening across our country. And I actually think just the chance to connect, I think, has been so powerful. I've been a part of so many webinars and virtual communities because I want to be with people and I want to connect. And so I think one thing I would be thinking about is, how do I build in space for authentic connection? Almost like responsive classroom. What's our community circle for adults? How can we check in on each other? How can we talk about what we've been learning, what we've been feeling, what we were afraid of, and start to create that space? And I think that feels really important, that people know that we're not just going to jump back in and pretend that this is like business as usual. The world has changed many times since the spring, and I think it's important to let people know that there's going to be a space for that. And then I always think, like, who are going to be the ringleaders that I can reach out to, who like really help to shape culture in my school or in my district or CMO, and think about like, hey, how can I get them excited, and how might I reach out to a few folks even now to be like, what would you really want to see, and how can you help me get other folks excited, so that there's some plants in the audience to kind of help shift the momentum. So those are two thoughts. Nick or Laura, anything coming to mind?
Okay. Nick, because Nick, you are Mr. Excitement to me, but I would just echo Chung-Hao, like recognizing, depending on how many people you support, people might feel a whole bunch of different things when they come into this space. And so I think creating the authentic space for people to be where they are, and also finding the places and the vision and values that we can anchor on to get excited, feels really critical.
Absolutely. I'll only add, I think it's a great way to go back to the why of like, why you can probably leave trails and emails and text message of like, why is it so exciting to come back and learn together? Why is it going to be so great that we're going to be in the same room? And that why might drive a lot of people to be able to like connect already and just come in thrilled to see everybody else, or just even in a virtual space to just be in another space and go to, yes, we want awesome outcomes for our students who some of us we couldn't even see at the end of the year. I'm so excited to come back and get to those awesome outcomes.
And I guess on that note, Nick, you just made me think, like, how can we bring students into our virtual spaces as teacher educators? Like, what are the ways that student voices, student work, student messages, student videos can still be a part of this space? Because I do think, like, we're all in education because we care about and are connected to kids. And I think that's the ultimate why for all of this. So how can they be brought into even virtual spaces in a variety of different ways? Because I think that's going to be really important as well.
Well, I want to say thank you so much again to the team from Leading Educators, Nick, Laura, Chung Hao. Thank you so very much for being so generous with your time and knowledge with everyone today. I'm just looking at our global educator community who's here in the chat, and they're all expressing their gratitude to you. And I also want to say to all of you who tuned in today, educators around the world, thank you so much for all that you're doing to support your colleagues, your students, your communities. This time in the world is especially challenging, and the work that you're doing is so deeply needed. So thank you also for being so generous with yourselves and continuing to serve your community so selflessly. This EDU on Air, as always, is going to be recorded and will be on the same website that you used to register, along with all of our past events. Additionally, we were going to have a Twitter chat tonight, but out of respect for what's happening in the world, it has been postponed. So this Twitter chat is happening on Thursday, June 25th at 5 p.m. Central. So if you want to continue the conversation about adult learning, virtual teacher support and professional learning, tune in on Thursday, June 25th at 5 o'clock Central, and we'll have some educators there to facilitate a really engaging discussion about how to do this well. Again, Chung Hao, Nick, Laura, thank you so much. Wishing you safety and health in the days and years and forever to come. I hope that your work continues, and I can't wait to stay tuned and see what Leading Educators has next. Just as a final reminder for those who are tuning in a little bit late, how do folks find out more about Leading Educators and get in contact with you? Chung Hao?
Yeah, well, Jenny, thank you so much for having us. It's been such a delight. People can reach out at @leadingeds, that's our Twitter handle, or leadingeducators.org. There's email information there on our website. And then at the beginning of the presentation, you actually have Twitter handles for all three of us. And so it'll be at the beginning, but I'm at Chung Hao Fu, for example. And Laura, Nick, do you want to share your Twitter handles really quick? Oh, there it is. That's where we are.
There you go. I was like, I can do it. I'm on a Google slide deck. I could just rewind. So yeah, if you guys want to take a quick screenshot of that, who they're in the chat, and you know what, I'll also drop all of their handles on the Leading Educators website in the chat as well. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. This is our penultimate EDU on Air around distance learning. We have one more next week around parent support. Same bat time, same bat channel. So Wednesday at the same time. And until then, please stay safe. I hope you're well. Have a restful week. And as always, don't forget to wash your hands. Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.